The Galactic Military Academy's Crystal Amphitheater had seen many prestigious gatherings, but none quite like the 2387 Strategic Analysis Symposium. 4 of the galaxy's most distinguished military minds sat around a holographic display table, each radiating the kind of confidence that only comes from never having lost a battle to a species that still uses projectile weapons. Commander Vex Thornfield adjusted his perfectly pressed uniform for the 3rd time in 5 minutes. At 47 cycles old, he'd conquered 12 systems using tactics so elegant they were taught in first-year strategy courses. His 3-dimensional battlefield projections were legendary, his casualty rates impressively low, and his ego appropriately massive. "Gentleman and lady," Vex announced with theatrical flair, "today we dissect the military incompetence of Earth's dominant species, Homo sapiens." He pronounced it like he was describing a particularly unpleasant fungal infection. Professor Quinn Starweaver snorted delicately, her crystalline features catching the amphitheater's ambient lighting. As the Academy's foremost xenomilitary historian, she'd catalogued the warfare patterns of over 3,000 species. Humans, she'd noted in her preliminary research, ranked somewhere between the club-wielding borflings of Sector 7 and those aquatic creatures who threw rocks with their tentacles. "The fascinating aspect," Quinn said, consulting her digital notes with practiced authority, "is how Earth's Galactic Council application was approved so rapidly. Usually we spend decades analyzing a species' military capabilities before considering membership. With humans, the review committee took one look at their file and rubber-stamped approval faster than a Zlorgian tax audit. Admiral Zara Brightclaw, veteran of the Kronos Wars and survivor of the Great Nebula Campaign, remained uncharacteristically quiet. Her scarred hands traced patterns on the table's surface while her compound eyes reflected the swirling holographic displays. Something about this whole situation felt off, but she couldn't quite identify what. Junior analyst Pip Quantum Dust practically vibrated with excitement. Fresh out of the academy with scores so high they'd broken the grading algorithm, Pip had volunteered for this assignment hoping to make a career-defining observation. The kind of insight that gets your name attached to tactical maneuvers and strategic principles. The preliminary data suggests humans wage warfare using primarily kinetic projectiles and chemical explosives, Pip reported enthusiastically. Their most advanced weapons appear to be fusion-based, which most civilized species abandoned millennia ago as unnecessarily messy. Vex activated the central display with a dramatic gesture. Precisely why this analysis will be brief. We'll examine their so-called military footage, document their primitive approaches, and submit our findings by lunch. The Galactic Council probably wants confirmation that Earth poses no strategic threat. The holographic interface hummed to life, displaying the Academy's logo before switching to a file directory labeled Human Military Operations, Classified Analysis. Hundreds of video files appeared, organized by conflict, time period, and what the translation algorithms had labeled as intensity levels. Shall we start with something recent and representative? Quinn suggested, her academic instincts taking over. Perhaps this file labeled modern peacekeeping operations from their early 21st century? As the first video began playing, showing uniformed humans moving through what appeared to be an urban environment, the 4 observers settled back in their chairs with the casual confidence of experts about to confirm their superiority. After all, how dangerous could a species be if they still fought wars on the ground instead of in space? The amphitheater's lighting dimmed automatically as the human footage began, and Admiral Zara found herself leaning forward despite her better judgment. Something in the way those human soldiers moved suggested this analysis might not be as straightforward as her colleagues assumed. The first video showed what appeared to be a standard military patrol. Human soldiers, covered in primitive fabric armor and carrying what looked like enhanced projectile weapons, moved through a destroyed urban landscape with methodical precision. Their formations were textbook standard, nothing the observers hadn't seen from dozens of other species. Note the basic small unit tactics, Vex commented smugly. They're using modified phalanx principles that the Zentorians mastered 3,000 years ago. adequate spacing, acceptable cover utilization, though their equipment appears charmingly antiquated. Quinn nodded approvingly. The urban environment appears to be post-conflict reconstruction. Standard peacekeeping deployment, probably dealing with minor insurgent elements. Nothing we haven't cataloged extensively. But as the footage continued, subtle details began accumulating that didn't quite fit the observer's preconceptions. The human soldiers moved with a fluid efficiency that suggested extensive training, and their communication patterns indicated tactical awareness that seemed almost prescient. "Wait," Pip interrupted, leaning closer to the display. "Did you see how that squad leader anticipated the sniper position? He redirected his team 30 seconds before the threat materialized." Admiral Zara's compound eyes focused more intently on the screen. The humans weren't just following standard protocols, they were adapting continuously to micro-changes in their environment that most species would never notice. The footage shifted to a different scenario, humans operating in what appeared to be a desert environment during a sandstorm. The observers expected to see reduced effectiveness, confusion, maybe tactical withdrawal to wait for better conditions. Instead, they watched human soldiers continuing their mission in conditions that would blind most galactic species and strip the skin from others. Not only were they operating normally, they were using the environmental chaos as tactical advantage. "That's impossible," Quinn stated flatly. "The particulate density in that atmosphere would render most sensor equipment useless. How are they maintaining unit cohesion?" The answer became apparent as the footage revealed humans using primitive visual signals, hand gestures, and what appeared to be intuitive understanding of their teammates' behavior patterns. They were fighting effectively in conditions that would ground entire galactic fleets. Vex's confident expression began showing cracks. "Well, environmental adaptation is notable. But surely their strategic thinking remains fundamentally limited." The next video proved him spectacularly wrong. The footage showed what the file labeled as asymmetric warfare, Vietnam conflict. The observers watched regular human military forces attempting to engage an enemy that refused to fight conventional battles. "This is fascinating from an anthropological perspective," Quinn commented, though her voice carried less certainty than before. "The irregular forces are using terrain and civilian populations as force multipliers. It's crude but surprisingly effective." What disturbed the observers wasn't just the tactical innovation, but the psychological implications. The footage showed humans who had been fighting for years in conditions that would break most species' will to resist, and they were still finding new ways to kill each other. Pip started taking notes frantically. "The adaptation rate is unprecedented. They're developing countermeasures to countermeasures in real time. And look at this, they're fighting in tropical environments that would be lethal to most galactic species just from the biological hazards." The video shifted again, this time showing Arctic warfare. Humans conducting military operations in temperatures that would flash freeze most alien biology, moving across terrain that would challenge military vehicles, and doing it with equipment that looked like it was assembled from spare parts. "Their environmental tolerance is beyond anything in our databases," Admiral Zara observed quietly. "These aren't specialized units, the footage indicates this is normal operational capacity." Vex cleared his throat, trying to reassert authority. "Environmental hardiness is admirable, but it doesn't indicate advanced strategic thinking. Raw persistence only gets you so far against superior firepower and tactics." As if responding to his challenge, the next video file opened, labeled simply Stalingrad, Urban Combat. The footage showed a city that had been bombed into rubble, with human forces fighting building to building to building, room-to-room battles that continued for months. The observers watched in growing silence as humans demonstrated combat effectiveness that bordered on the supernatural. They fought in the wreckage of their own civilization, using debris as weapons, turning destroyed buildings into fortresses, and refusing to surrender even when victory seemed mathematically impossible. "The casualty rates," Pip whispered, rapidly calculating figures. They're sustaining losses that would force most species to negotiate immediate surrender, and they're still launching offensive operations. Professor Quinn started cross-referencing the footage with her xenomilitary databases, searching for comparable conflicts. Her searches returned 0 matches. No known species had ever sustained combat operations under similar conditions for more than a few days. The humans had done it for years. Perhaps, Admiral Zara said slowly, we should reconsider our analytical framework. These aren't just environmental adaptations or tactical innovations. There's something fundamentally different about how this species approaches warfare. As the next video file loaded, labeled Pacific Island Campaign, Amphibious Assault, all 4 observers leaned forward despite themselves. Their academic confidence was beginning to crack, replaced by something that might have been professional respect, if it wasn't starting to feel suspiciously like concern. The Pacific footage opened with scenes that defied every principle of civilized warfare the observers had studied. Humans were conducting amphibious assaults on fortified islands, not just attacking from the sea, which was tactically challenging enough, but doing it repeatedly across thousands of miles of ocean against enemies who had months to prepare defensive positions. This is logistically impossible, Quinn muttered, furiously checking her calculations. The supply lines alone would bankrupt most stellar confederations. They're projecting force across oceanic distances using primitive combustion-powered vehicles. But the impossible was happening on screen. Human forces were landing on beaches under devastating fire, taking catastrophic casualties, and continuing their advance not just despite the losses but because of them. Each failed assault provided intelligence for the next attempt. Vex watched a particular sequence 3 times before speaking. They're using previous casualties as tactical data points. The deaths aren't just acceptable losses, they're deliberate intelligence gathering. The footage shifted to jungle warfare, and Pip made a sound that was probably supposed to be analytical but came out more like a whimper. Humans were fighting in environments so hostile that simply surviving should have been a full-time occupation. Instead, they were conducting complex military operations while dealing with diseases, predators, and terrain that would challenge exploratory missions from the most advanced galactic civilizations. Note the psychological warfare component, Admiral Zara observed, her professional demeanor starting to show stress fractures. They're not just adapting to environmental challenges, they're weaponizing them. The screen showed human forces using local hazards as tactical advantages, turning poisonous flora into weapons, training native predators for reconnaissance, and demonstrating survival skills that bordered on the supernatural. These weren't specialized units, the documentation indicated this was standard infantry capability. A new file loaded guerrilla operations, insurgency tactics. The observers watched humans who had lost conventional battles disappear into civilian populations and continue fighting using methods that made their previous warfare look quaint by comparison. They're not retreating, Pip realized with growing horror. Losing a battle just changes their operational parameters. They switched to different rules. The footage showed humans conducting sabotage operations, assassination campaigns, and psychological warfare that targeted not just enemy military units but entire governmental structures. They attacked supply lines, communications networks, and even the enemy's will to continue fighting. This is ethically problematic, Quinn said weakly. Most galactic warfare conventions specifically prohibit targeting civilian infrastructure and non-combatant populations. Admiral Zara's laugh contained no humor. I don't think humans signed those conventions, Professor. The next video made clear exactly how right she was. The file labeled Total War. Sherman's march showed systematic destruction of enemy civilian capacity. Not just military targets, but the entire economic and social infrastructure that supported military operations. They're attacking the concept of surrender, Vex whispered, his usual confidence completely evaporated. They're not just defeating enemy forces, they're eliminating the possibility of future resistance. Pip was taking notes so frantically that smoke was beginning to rise from their digital stylus. The psychological impact calculations are beyond our modeling capacity. They're engineering trauma responses that affect entire generations. The footage continued with scenarios that challenged every assumption about civilized conflict resolution. Humans fighting in frozen wastelands, scorching deserts, diseased swamps, and radioactive wastelands. Not just surviving in these conditions, but using them as weapons against enemies who couldn't adapt as quickly. "I need to step outside," Pip announced suddenly, standing up on shaking legs. "I need to file a report with my supervisors. This analysis is beyond my clearance level." "Sit down, analyst," Admiral Zara commanded. "We're just getting started." But Pip was already heading for the door, muttering something about requesting immediate transfer to the Galactic Postal Service. The door sealed behind them with a finality that seemed to echo in the suddenly quiet amphitheater. The remaining 3 observers stared at the display as it loaded the next file: Prisoner Operations, Enhanced Interrogation. Professor Quinn read the file description and immediately stood up. "I withdraw my participation from this analysis. My academic credentials cannot be associated with reviewing torture methodologies." "Professor, we need your expertise to complete the assessment," Vex protested. "My expertise tells me that any species that systematically develops techniques for breaking the minds of prisoners is not suitable for detailed academic study. I'm recommending that this entire analysis be classified at the highest levels, and that Earth's Council membership be subject to immediate review." Quinn gathered her materials with jerky, agitated movements. "For the record, I'm filing a formal recommendation that human military capabilities be reclassified from primitive projectile-based to unknown but extremely dangerous. Good day, gentlemen." The door sealed again, leaving only Commander Vex and Admiral Zara staring at a display queue that still showed hundreds of video files waiting for analysis. "Should we continue?" Vex asked, though his voice suggested he already knew the answer might be beyond their professional capacity to handle. Admiral Zara's compound eyes reflected the holographic interface as she scrolled through the remaining files. The titles alone were enough to make her question her entire military career: nuclear warfare, chemical weapons, biological warfare, mutually assured destruction. And something called special operations that was classified so heavily the Academy's systems were requesting additional clearance codes. "We continue," she said grimly. "Someone has to know what we're dealing with." The nuclear warfare files opened with footage of mushroom clouds rising over human cities. Not military installations, not strategic targets, but population centers with millions of inhabitants. The observers watched in stunned silence as humans demonstrated their willingness to use weapons that could literally vaporize their own species. "This has to be simulation training," Vex said desperately. "No species actually deploys planetary-scale weapons against their own kind." But the documentation was unambiguous. Not only had humans used these weapons against each other, but they'd built thousands more and then spent decades locked in a strategic standoff where any conflict could result in planetary extinction. "They call it mutually assured destruction," Admiral Zara read from the translated files. All mad. They literally named their strategic doctrine after insanity, and it worked for half a century. The footage showed vast underground bunkers, missile silos scattered across continents, and submarines carrying enough firepower to sterilize planets prowling the oceans. Humans had built a system where their species' survival depended on everyone simultaneously being too terrified to start a war and too prepared to avoid finishing one. "The psychological implications are staggering," Vex muttered, staring at footage of human children practicing nuclear attack drills in schools. "They're conditioning their offspring to expect annihilation as a normal part of childhood development." But the deeper horror was yet to come. The files revealed that humans had not only built these weapons, they'd continued developing more efficient ways to kill each other even while maintaining the nuclear standoff. Chemical weapons that attacked nervous systems, biological weapons that targeted specific genetic markers, and something called enhanced radiation weapons that killed living beings while leaving infrastructure intact. They've systematized the end of the world, Admiral Zara observed with the kind of calm that comes from complete psychological overload. Multiple times, using different methodologies. The footage shifted to what the files labeled special operations. The first video showed humans infiltrating enemy positions using stealth techniques that made their previous tactics look straightforward. These weren't regular soldiers, these were humans specifically trained to kill other humans using methods that bypassed conventional defensive measures. Vex watched a sequence showing human operatives conducting sabotage missions behind enemy lines and felt something fundamental crack in his understanding of warfare. They're not just fighting battles. They're conducting surgical strikes against the concept of security itself. The Special Operations files revealed capabilities that challenged basic assumptions about combat effectiveness. Humans who could operate alone behind enemy lines for months, conducting missions that required skills ranging from advanced engineering to psychological manipulation. They were simultaneously soldiers, spies, saboteurs, and assassins. "Look at this training footage," Admiral Zara said, her voice carrying a disturbing note of professional admiration. "They're teaching these operatives to resist interrogation techniques that would break most galactic species in minutes." The footage showed humans being subjected to physical and psychological torture as part of their own training regimen. Not punishment or criminal process, but deliberate preparation for capture and interrogation. They were conditioning their own people to endure horrors that most civilizations used as ultimate punishments. "Commander," Admiral Zara said quietly, "I think we need to discuss the implications of this analysis with higher authority." But Vex was staring at the display with the glazed expression of someone whose worldview was undergoing rapid and traumatic revision. "They don't fight wars, Admiral. They fight extinction events. Every conflict is potentially the last conflict their species will ever experience." The next file was labeled Civilian Integration, Total War Doctrine. The footage showed human populations being systematically prepared for military operations, with civilian industries converted to weapons production and non-combatant populations trained for resistance operations. "They don't have civilians," Vex realized with growing horror. "Every human is a potential combatant. Their entire species is a military organization masquerading as a civilization." Admiral Zara scrolled through file after file of documentation showing human societies transforming themselves into war machines when threatened. Factories producing weapons instead of consumer goods, children learning military skills alongside academic subjects, and entire populations prepared to continue fighting even if their governments surrendered. "This explains the fast-track council membership," she said suddenly. "The review committee didn't approve Earth's application because humans were harmless. They approved it because humans are so dangerous that having them as enemies was unthinkable." Vex stood up abruptly, his perfectly pressed uniform now wrinkled and stained with perspiration that shouldn't have been possible in the amphitheater's controlled environment. "I need to submit my resignation from this analysis. My tactical expertise is insufficient for evaluating a species that treats planetary extinction as an acceptable strategic option. Commander, we have a duty to complete this assessment." "Admiral, I've spent my entire career developing elegant solutions to military problems. These humans don't solve problems, they eliminate the possibility of problems recurring. Forever." He gathered his materials with shaking hands. "I'm recommending immediate reclassification of human military capabilities and requesting transfer to the Galactic Agricultural Assessment Division. Analyzing crop yields seems infinitely safer than trying to understand a species that perfected genocidal warfare and then decided it wasn't efficient enough." As Vex left the amphitheater, Admiral Zara found herself alone with the display showing hundreds of additional files still waiting for analysis. The titles included Psychological Operations, Information Warfare, Economic Combat, and something called Fourth-Generation Warfare. That apparently involved attacking the enemy's ability to recognize that they were at war. She activated the next video file and settled back to finish the analysis alone. Someone had to know what the galaxy was dealing with, and apparently that someone was going to be her. The footage began with what appeared to be a peaceful human city, and Admiral Zara prepared herself for whatever fresh horror was about to unfold. The psychological operations files opened with footage that looked deceptively mundane, humans distributing leaflets, broadcasting radio programs, and conducting what appeared to be community outreach. Admiral Zara initially felt relief that finally she'd found something approaching civilized behavior. Then she began understanding what the humans were actually doing. They weren't distributing information, they were conducting surgical strikes against enemy morale, but targeting specific psychological vulnerabilities to induce surrender without direct combat. The community outreach was actually sophisticated manipulation designed to turn enemy populations against their own governments. They're weaponizing communication itself, Admiral Zara muttered, watching footage of human propaganda operations that had convinced entire populations to abandon military resistance. They're not just defeating enemy forces, they're convincing enemies to defeat themselves. The information warfare files were worse. Humans had developed techniques for attacking enemy decision-making processes, flooding communication networks with false information designed to paralyze command structures. They were fighting battles in conceptual space, targeting the enemy's ability to understand reality itself. But the fourth-generation warfare documentation pushed Admiral Zara's sanity to its breaking point. The footage showed conflicts where traditional military operations were secondary to attacks on the enemy's social cohesion, economic stability, and cultural identity. Humans were fighting wars designed to eliminate not just enemy military capacity, but the entire civilization that supported it. They're not just conquering territories, she realized with dawning horror. They're erasing the possibility of organized resistance by destroying the social structures that create resistance in the first place. The files revealed human operations that spanned decades, with objectives that went beyond victory to permanent pacification. They weren't just winning conflicts, they were engineering post-conflict societies that would be incapable of future military organization. A new file loaded, special access programs, black operations. The classification level was so high that Admiral Zara's security clearance barely qualified for access, and the first video made clear why the information was so heavily restricted. The footage showed human military units that officially didn't exist, conducting operations that were never acknowledged, using techniques that were never documented. These weren't regular special forces, these were humans specifically trained to operate outside any legal or ethical framework, conducting missions that other humans would consider war crimes. They've created military units designed to fight other humans using tactics that humans themselves consider unacceptable, Admiral Zara whispered to the empty amphitheater. They're so effective at warfare that they've had to develop separate military organizations to fight themselves. The Black Operations files contained documentation of human-on-human conflicts that involved techniques so advanced they challenged basic assumptions about combat effectiveness. Psychological warfare that induced permanent mental breakdown, sabotage operations that targeted enemy genetics, and something called mimetic warfare that attacked the enemy's ability to form coherent thoughts. Admiral Zara realized she was laughing, but the sound contained no humor. They've turned warfare into a science, a comprehensive, systematic science with specialized applications for every possible scenario. The final files in the sequence were labeled contingency planning, alien contact protocols. Admiral Zara's laughter stopped abruptly as she realized she was about to review human preparations for exactly the kind of contact that had led to their council membership. The footage showed human military planners developing response strategies for extraterrestrial contact, and their assumptions were uniformly hostile. Every scenario assumed that alien contact would be followed by invasion, and every response plan involved tactics designed to make conquest so costly that withdrawal would be preferable to victory. They planned for us, Admiral Zara breathed. Before they ever met another species, they developed comprehensive strategies for fighting wars against enemies with unknown capabilities. The human contingency plans included techniques for fighting technologically superior opponents, tactics for conducting resistance operations under occupation, and strategies for making planetary conquest pyrrhically expensive. They'd prepared for every possible form of alien aggression, and their response plans were designed to make victory meaningless. But the deepest horror was yet to come. The files revealed that human military doctrine assumed that any alien species advanced enough for interstellar travel would be both technologically superior and morally compromised. Their plans weren't just for resisting invasion, they were for converting defensive operations into offensive campaigns designed to eliminate the alien threat permanently. They don't just plan to survive first contact, Admiral Zara realized. They plan to win it. The footage showed human strategists developing techniques for stealing alien technology, subverting alien command structures, and conducting genocide against species they'd never encountered. Their contingency planning included scenarios for fighting wars across multiple star systems using captured alien equipment. Admiral Zara stared at the display as it showed the final video in the sequence, human military academies incorporating xenocide studies into their standard curriculum. They were training their officers to conduct extermination campaigns against hypothetical alien species as routine professional development. "They're teaching their children to kill us," she whispered. "All of us. Every possible version of us they can imagine." The display showed hundreds of additional files still waiting for analysis, but Admiral Zara knew she'd reached the limit of what her sanity could process. The humans weren't just militarily capable, they were militarily obsessed to a degree that bordered on species-wide psychosis. She sat alone in the crystal amphitheater, surrounded by the scattered notes of colleagues who'd fled rather than complete the analysis, staring at a display that promised even more horrifying revelations about humanity's approach to warfare. The next file was labeled Current Military Doctrine, Peacetime Operations, and Admiral Zara realized that everything she'd reviewed so far was just historical background. The humans' current capabilities were still waiting to be analyzed. Admiral Zara spent the next 6 hours reviewing files alone, and by the end she understood why Earth's Galactic Council application had been processed with unprecedented speed. The review committee hadn't been evaluating whether humans were suitable for membership. They'd been calculating how quickly they could get humans inside the galactic political structure before someone made the catastrophic mistake of treating them as enemies. Her final report, submitted directly to the Council's Strategic Assessment Division, was remarkably brief considering the scope of the analysis. Subject: Human Military Capability Assessment, Urgent Reclassification Required. Distinguished Council Members. After comprehensive review of human warfare documentation, I recommend immediate implementation of the following protocols. First, human military capabilities should be reclassified from primitive projectile-based to extinction-level strategic threat. Their technological limitations are irrelevant compared to their operational methodology, which treats planetary destruction as an acceptable tactical option. Second, all existing galactic warfare doctrines should be reviewed for adequacy against human strategic thinking. Our current military frameworks assume opponents who share basic civilizational values regarding proportionate response and acceptable casualties. Humans appear to operate under no such constraints. Third, Earth's Council membership should be confirmed immediately with full strategic partnership status. The alternative, having humans as potential adversaries, represents an unacceptable risk to galactic stability. I am personally requesting immediate reassignment to the Diplomatic Corps, specifically to human liaison positions. If this species is going to be part of galactic civilization, someone needs to understand how their minds work. More importantly, someone needs to make sure they continue seeing us as allies rather than obstacles. For the record, the human military motto appears to be "Si vis pacem, para bellum." If you want peace, prepare for war. After reviewing their historical implementations of this philosophy, I believe we should take them at their word. Respectfully submitted. Admiral Zara Brightclaw, Academy Strategic Analysis Division. Request: immediate transfer to Diplomatic Corps, Human Relations. 3 days later, Admiral Zara received confirmation that her report had been distributed to the full Council with emergency classification. Earth's membership was not only confirmed but expanded to include human military advisors being attached to galactic defense planning committees. The Academy's Strategic Analysis Symposium was officially cancelled indefinitely, with a notation that certain military doctrines exceed safe academic review parameters. Commander Vex Thornfield was last seen working happily in the Agricultural Assessment Division, where his reports on crop yield optimization were considered models of comprehensive analysis. He declined all requests for interviews about his human warfare research. Professor Quinn Starweaver published a single academic paper titled The Necessity of Ethical Constraints in Xenomilitary Studies before transferring to the Galactic University's Philosophy Department, where she specialized in questions about the nature of civilized behavior. Junior analyst Pip Quantum Dust was promoted to Senior Cultural Liaison and assigned to Earth's Embassy, where their enthusiastic note-taking skills were considered invaluable for understanding human social dynamics that didn't involve weapons. 6 months after the symposium, recruitment posters began appearing in military academies across the galaxy. They featured human military personnel in combat situations, with text in multiple galactic languages reading, Earth Defense Force, recruitment open to qualified galactic citizens, but learn from the best. The posters were extremely popular, though Academy medical staff noted a significant increase in stress-related transfers among students who researched human military history as part of their application process. Admiral Zara, now serving as Galactic Council liaison to human military operations, submitted regular reports on human integration into galactic defense structures. Her assessments were uniformly positive, though they often included footnotes suggesting that human tactical suggestions be implemented exactly as recommended without modifications or improvements. Her final report of the year included a single recommendation that was adopted immediately by unanimous council vote. Under no circumstances should any galactic civilization attempt to implement human warfare doctrines independently. Their military effectiveness appears to be inseparable from psychological characteristics that may be species-specific. We should remain grateful that humans are willing to share their expertise rather than attempting to demonstrate it. The file on human military capabilities was permanently classified at the highest level, with access restricted to council members and senior diplomatic staff. A note in the file index suggested that future military assessments of emerging species should include psychological evaluation protocols developed specifically to identify human adjacent strategic thinking patterns as early as possible. Earth remained a valued council member, and humans continued to demonstrate their commitment to galactic peace through their enthusiastic participation in defense planning. The fact that their peacekeeping suggestions often involved scenarios that other species considered apocalyptic was noted but not considered problematic, since human implementations consistently achieved desired objectives with acceptable collateral damage. The galaxy learned to appreciate having humans as allies, particularly after the first joint military exercise demonstrated that human strategic thinking solved several long-standing galactic security problems with impressive efficiency. Nobody ever asked to review the complete human military files again.